Title: I camped alone and heard footsteps outside my tent all night. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. Some nights in the wilderness are silent. Others are never meant to be survived. What follows is a true account of a man who believed isolation meant safety, until the dark proved otherwise. This is not a story about monsters rushing from the woods. It is about patience, presence, and something that walked in circles outside a thin layer of fabric until morning came. Subscribe and listen closely. He chose the forest because it promised quiet. Not the artificial quiet of a closed room or the dull hum of a city at night, but the deep, breathing stillness that only exists where people rarely stay long. The decision had nothing to do with thrill-seeking or bravery. It was practical, almost mundane. He needed space. He needed distance from schedules, screens, and other people's voices. He believed that being alone in the woods would simplify everything. He was wrong, but not in the way most people imagine when they hear stories like this. The location was a stretch of state land several miles from the nearest paved road, accessible only by a narrow dirt trail that wound through old-growth trees and uneven terrain. It was not officially marked as a campsite, but it was known among experienced hikers as a place where no one bothered you. That alone made it appealing. No families, no late-night laughter, no strangers passing too close to a tent. Just trees, ground, and time moving slowly. He arrived late in the afternoon, when the light was already beginning to soften and stretch. The sun filtered through the canopy in long, slanted beams, illuminating floating dust and drifting insects. The air smelled damp, heavy with soil and decaying leaves. Everything felt still but not lifeless. Birds moved high above, unseen but audible. Somewhere deeper in the forest, something larger shifted through undergrowth, but he paid it no attention. Large animals were expected here. Predictable. Logical. Setting up camp took longer than expected. The ground was uneven, and it took several attempts to find a spot flat enough for the tent. He cleared rocks, brushed away branches, and tested the firmness of the soil with his boot. The tent itself was simple, lightweight, designed for solo trips. He had used it many times before without incident. He anchored it carefully, tightening each line until the fabric stood taut and clean against the air. When finished, it looked small and fragile among the towering trees, but that thought passed quickly. It always did. As daylight faded, the forest shifted. The temperature dropped just enough to be noticeable, and the sounds changed character. Daytime birds quieted, replaced by the subtle movement of nocturnal life. The forest did not become louder. It became more deliberate. Each sound carried intent. Leaves moved without wind. Twigs snapped, then nothing followed. The ground seemed to hold its breath between moments. He cooked a simple meal on a compact stove, careful to keep everything contained. No strong smells. No mess. He packed away the remains, hung his food bag at a distance, and checked his surroundings once more before retreating into the tent. The last light drained from the sky as he zipped the entrance closed. Darkness settled fully, not sudden, but complete. Inside the tent, the world narrowed. The thin walls filtered the forest into shadows and shapes, vague movements that only suggested depth. He laid out his sleeping bag, arranged his pack as a pillow, and switched off his headlamp. The darkness inside was immediate and total. Outside, the forest continued its quiet activity, but it felt far away now, as if separated by more than just fabric. At first, everything felt exactly as expected. The ground was firm but tolerable. The air inside the tent warmed slowly with his presence. His breathing evened out as the day's fatigue settled into his muscles. He listened passively to the forest, letting the sounds wash over him without focus. A distant owl called once, then again, its voice fading into the trees. Something small scurried close by, too light to register as a concern. He welcomed these sounds. They reassured him that nothing unusual was happening. Time passed without clear markers. The forest has no clocks. Darkness erases distinctions. Eventually, his thoughts drifted, not quite asleep but no longer fully awake. His awareness softened, edges blurring as his body relaxed into the ground beneath him. That was when the first sound registered as wrong. It was not loud. It did not crash or announce itself. It was a careful noise, precise enough to separate itself from the background without demanding immediate attention. A soft compression of leaves. A deliberate shift of weight. It came from just beyond the tent wall, close enough that the fabric barely muffled it. He remained still, listening. Small animals moved all the time. This, he told himself, was no different. Raccoons, foxes, deer. The forest floor was shared space. The sound paused, then resumed, slower now. Another step. Another careful press into the earth. What unsettled him was not the presence of movement, but its consistency. Animals did not usually linger. They passed through, following scents or paths invisible to human eyes. This sound did neither. It stayed close, circling just beyond sight. The steps were measured, evenly spaced, as if whoever or whatever was moving understood exactly where the tent ended and chose to remain just outside it. He held his breath without realizing it. The fabric wall to his left dimly reflected starlight, a faint gradient of shadow and gray. Nothing pressed against it. Nothing brushed it. The sound stopped again, and for a long moment, there was only the distant, natural noise of the forest resuming its rhythm. He exhaled slowly, forcing his body to relax. He told himself that fear came easily in the dark, that the mind filled gaps with imagined threats. He shifted slightly inside the sleeping bag, testing whether movement would provoke a response. It did not. The forest remained unchanged. Minutes passed. Then the sound returned. This time it was closer. Not closer in distance but in intent. The steps resumed, slower than before, each one placed with care. They traced the outline of the tent, maintaining a constant distance, never approaching directly, never retreating. It was as if the presence outside was mapping the structure, learning its shape through motion. His thoughts began to sharpen. Adrenaline crept in quietly, tightening muscles, sharpening senses. He focused on details. The weight of the steps suggested something heavier than a small animal, but not heavy enough to crush branches or snap thick wood. The cadence was wrong for a deer. Too controlled. Too steady. Predators moved differently, he knew. They stalked with pauses, bursts of motion, not this slow, even pacing. The sound completed a full circle and stopped directly behind his head. He could feel it there, not through sight or touch, but through awareness. The sensation of being observed pressed in on him, heavy and unmistakable. His scalp prickled. His skin tightened across his shoulders. He did not move. The silence stretched. Seconds elongated into something thicker, more oppressive. He strained to hear breathing, a sniff, any sign of life beyond the footsteps. There was nothing. The absence itself became terrifying. Whatever stood there did not fidget. It did not adjust its stance. It simply remained. Then, without warning, the footsteps resumed. They moved away this time, not retreating but continuing the circuit. The pattern repeated. One slow loop, then another. Always just far enough to avoid contact. Always close enough to be unmistakable. Hours seemed to pass, though it may have been minutes. Time fractured under the strain of constant alertness. His muscles ached from holding tension. His jaw hurt from being clenched. Every instinct urged him to react, to call out, to shine a light, to confront the unknown. He resisted them all. Something about the behavior outside told him that acknowledgement would be a mistake. The forest itself seemed to respond. Other sounds diminished. The insects grew quiet. The distant calls ceased. It was not absolute silence, but it was thinner, strained, as if the natural world was listening too. The footsteps continued, steady and patient, indifferent to the passing of time. At some point, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm fear. His thoughts slowed. His awareness dulled around the edges. He worried about slipping into sleep, about what might happen if his guard fell even briefly. He forced himself to focus on the sensation of the ground beneath him, the fabric against his skin, the steady rhythm of his own breathing. The steps stopped again, closer than before. This time, they halted near the entrance of the tent. He could sense the position clearly. If the zipper were opened, whatever stood there would be directly in front of him. The knowledge settled into his chest like a weight. Nothing happened. No hand reached out. No fabric shifted. The presence remained perfectly still. The waiting stretched on, deliberate and unbroken. His fear transformed, no longer sharp but deep, heavy, consuming. This was not a moment of attack. It was a moment of testing. When the footsteps resumed once more, they were slower still, dragging slightly, as if the weight behind them had increased or the effort had grown more deliberate. The sound completed another circle, then another, never varying, never rushing. The repetition became unbearable. It stripped away reason, leaving only raw awareness. He did not know when dawn would come. He did not know if it would matter. The forest had closed in around his small shelter, and something within it had chosen to stay. As the footsteps continued their endless path, one terrible certainty took root in his mind. Whatever was outside was not lost. It was not curious. It was waiting, and it had all the time in the world. The forest did not change when the footsteps stopped. That was what unsettled him most. There was no release of tension, no sudden return of sound, no rush of insects reclaiming the night. The stillness remained intact, stretched tight like fabric pulled too far. The presence outside the tent had not vanished. It had only chosen to pause. He lay rigid inside the sleeping bag, his body beginning to ache from remaining frozen for so long. The ground pressed into his shoulder and hip, sharp points of discomfort that normally would have demanded movement. He ignored them. Pain was manageable. Whatever waited beyond the thin wall of nylon was not. Minutes passed with no sound at all. His ears rang in the quiet. He focused on his breathing, slow and shallow, terrified that even the smallest noise from inside the tent might draw attention. His thoughts began to spiral, replaying every detail of his arrival, every decision that led him here. He wondered if he had missed a sign, a marker, something that should have warned him away from this place. The forest had felt normal when he arrived. Too normal. That realization came unbidden and lodged itself in his mind. There had been no birds fleeing, no sense of intrusion. The woods had accepted him too easily, as if his presence was expected. The idea made his stomach tighten. A sound finally broke the silence. It was subtle, almost indistinguishable from the natural settling of the forest floor. A shift of weight. Not a step, not yet. Just pressure being applied somewhere close. He felt it rather than heard it, a change in the air, a disturbance of space. His pulse spiked instantly. The pressure shifted again, closer to the tent wall. The fabric did not move. Whatever stood there understood distance. It knew exactly how far it could approach without touching. That knowledge terrified him more than aggression would have. This was not an animal driven by hunger or curiosity. This was something deliberate. The footsteps resumed, but the pattern had changed. They no longer traced a perfect circle. Instead, they moved erratically, stopping at uneven intervals, lingering in certain spots longer than others. The pacing felt exploratory, as though the presence was testing reactions, gauging boundaries. Each pause felt longer than the last, stretching his nerves thinner with every second. His muscles began to tremble despite his efforts to remain still. Fear seeped into every part of his body, cold and invasive. He fought the urge to reach for his headlamp. Light felt like a fragile defense, one that might shatter whatever balance existed between him and the thing outside. Something deep in his instincts warned him that illumination would change the rules. The footsteps drifted toward the rear of the tent again, stopping directly behind his head. The proximity was unbearable. He imagined the outline of a shape standing there, featureless and patient, facing the thin barrier that separated them. He imagined it leaning closer, studying the curve of his skull through fabric and darkness. His skin crawled with the thought. Time lost meaning. His internal sense of minutes and hours dissolved into a constant present, defined only by the rhythm of fear and the sound of movement outside. His mouth went dry. Swallowing felt impossibly loud. Every involuntary sound his body made felt like a betrayal. The forest remained unnaturally quiet. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. The absence of background noise created a vacuum that amplified every subtle movement. When the footsteps resumed again, the sound carried farther, sharper, as if the forest itself were listening. At some point, exhaustion began to dull the edges of his terror. His thoughts slowed, drifting dangerously close to sleep. He fought it with everything he had, focusing on sensory details, on the feeling of fabric beneath his fingers, on the cold air brushing his face. Sleep felt like surrender. The footsteps stopped once more, this time near the front of the tent. He sensed a shift, a change in posture. The presence outside seemed to lower itself, as if crouching or bending closer to the entrance. The fabric remained unmoved, but the space beyond it felt crowded, compressed. A new sound emerged, faint but unmistakable. A slow disturbance of leaves, not from walking, but from something adjusting its position. The sound repeated, careful and controlled. Whatever was outside was no longer circling. It was settling. Panic flared hot and sudden in his chest. His breathing threatened to become erratic. He forced it down, terrified that the rise and fall of his chest might be visible as a shadow against the tent wall. He pressed himself flatter against the ground, as though trying to become smaller, less present. The waiting became unbearable. Each second stretched into something heavy and oppressive. His mind filled the silence with imagined outcomes, none of them survivable. He wondered if this was how it ended, not with violence but with patience. The idea that something could wait him out, could simply remain until fear or exhaustion broke him, was more horrifying than any sudden attack. The forest gave no indication of the approaching dawn. The darkness remained complete, impenetrable. He had no sense of direction, no way to orient himself beyond the vague knowledge of where he had entered the tent. The world outside had collapsed into a ring of unseen threat. The footsteps returned again, but now they were different. Heavier, slower. Each step carried more weight, pressing deeper into the ground. The rhythm suggested purpose, not wandering. The sound traced a path closer to the tent than before, skirting the edge of contact with deliberate precision. The fabric trembled slightly as something passed close enough to disturb the air. His heart slammed against his ribs. He clenched his teeth, fighting the urge to cry out. The presence moved past the tent entrance, then stopped. He could feel it there, close enough that the barrier between them felt meaningless. Nothing happened. The stillness that followed was suffocating. The absence of movement felt intentional, as if the presence were waiting for him to react. The realization struck him with chilling clarity. The thing outside knew he was awake. It had known all along. His fear deepened, settling into his bones. There was no hiding now, no pretending that he was unseen. The thin walls of the tent offered no concealment from something that operated on awareness rather than sight. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. The footsteps retreated slowly, moving away from the tent for the first time. Hope flared weakly in his chest, fragile and uncertain. He listened intently, tracking the sound as it faded into the darkness. The forest remained silent, offering no reassurance. Just as he began to believe the presence was leaving, the footsteps stopped again, farther away now but still close enough to hear. The pause stretched, long and deliberate. Then, impossibly, the sound began to move in a straight line, not circling, not wandering, but pacing back and forth along a single path. The movement was repetitive, mechanical, as if tracing an invisible boundary. The sound passed from left to right, then right to left, over and over again. The monotony was maddening. It felt ritualistic, purposeful in a way he could not understand. His body shook with silent tremors. Fear had become a constant state, no longer spiking but unrelenting. He wondered how long a human mind could endure this kind of sustained terror without breaking. He felt himself fraying at the edges, his thoughts slipping into dark places. The forest offered no mercy. The pacing continued, unwavering, relentless. Each pass felt closer, though the distance never seemed to change. The presence maintained its boundary perfectly, never crossing it, never retreating. It was as if the tent marked a line that could not yet be breached. Hours passed like this, or perhaps only minutes. Time had become meaningless, a blur of sound and fear. His muscles cramped from tension. His eyes burned from being held open too long. He blinked carefully, afraid that even the smallest lapse might be noticed. At last, a subtle change occurred. The pacing slowed, the intervals between passes lengthening. The sound grew fainter, not farther away but softer, as though the weight behind it was lifting. The presence seemed to withdraw its focus just slightly. The forest began to stir. A distant insect chirped once, tentative and brief. Then another. The sounds were faint, fragile, but they signaled a shift. The night was not over, but something had changed. The footsteps stopped completely. The silence that followed was different from before. It felt less oppressive, less charged. The air seemed to loosen, to breathe again. His body sagged with relief so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. He remained still, afraid to trust it. Gradually, the forest reclaimed its voice. Insects resumed their chorus. A breeze whispered through leaves high above. The world felt larger again, less focused on the small circle around his tent. Whatever had been there was gone, or at least no longer present in the same way. He did not sleep. He lay awake until the first gray hint of dawn filtered through the canopy, watching the darkness thin and retreat. When light finally came, it felt unreal, fragile, as though it might vanish if he moved too quickly. The forest in daylight looked ordinary, almost peaceful. There were no signs of disturbance, no tracks near the tent, no marks in the soil. The ground looked exactly as it had the day before. The normalcy felt wrong, insulting in its indifference. He packed his belongings with shaking hands, his movements slow and deliberate. He did not explore. He did not linger. The forest had shown him enough. As he left the clearing, he felt a lingering awareness at his back, a sense of being watched that did not fade with distance. The trail led him away, but the memory followed, heavy and unshakable. He would later realize that the most terrifying part was not what had happened that night, but what had not. There had been no confrontation, no explanation, no closure. Only the certainty that something in the forest had found him, measured him, and chosen, for reasons he would never understand, to let him leave. Leaving the forest did not feel like escape. It felt like postponement. As he walked away from the campsite, Every step carried the weight of unfinished attention, as though something behind him had not lost interest, only patience. The trail felt longer than it had the day before, winding in ways he did not remember, each turn feeding the sense that distance was an illusion rather than protection. Daylight should have brought relief. Instead, it sharpened his unease. Sunlight revealed too much and explained nothing. The trees stood as they always had, tall and indifferent. Birds moved freely again, unconcerned with the terror that had unfolded beneath their branches hours earlier. The forest behaved as though the night had never happened, and that refusal to acknowledge it made the experience feel unreal, like something he had imagined under stress. He reached his car without incident. The vehicle felt foreign, almost fragile, as he unlocked it and climbed inside. The enclosed space did not bring comfort. The memory of thin fabric separating him from the unknown lingered, making the metal and glass feel insufficient. He sat in the driver's seat longer than necessary, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly until his pulse steadied. The drive home passed in a blur. Roads slipped by without registering. His thoughts replayed fragments of the night, looping over details that refused to settle into logic. He searched for explanations that fit within reality, but each one collapsed under scrutiny. Animals did not behave that way. People did not move unseen for hours without revealing themselves. The behavior he had witnessed did not align with fear or curiosity. It aligned with intent. When he finally reached home, the familiarity of the space felt wrong. The walls seemed closer than before, the room smaller. He locked the doors automatically, then checked them again, lingering on the sound of each bolt sliding into place. Even indoors, the sensation of being observed persisted, a faint pressure at the back of his awareness. He avoided sleep that night. Exhaustion tugged at him, but he resisted, afraid of what might surface if his mind loosened its grip. The night passed uneventfully, but the lack of disturbance offered no reassurance. He had learned that silence did not mean absence. In the days that followed, life resumed its routines, but he moved through them like an observer rather than a participant. Ordinary sounds made him flinch. Footsteps in hallways drew his attention instantly. The soft rustle of fabric or the creak of a settling building triggered a rush of adrenaline he could not control. He told no one what had happened. The story resisted being spoken aloud. Words felt inadequate, too blunt to capture the precision and patience of the presence in the forest. He feared that sharing it would diminish it, reduce it to something manageable. Part of him also feared disbelief. The experience felt personal, as though it had been meant for him alone. Sleep eventually claimed him in fragments. When it did, it brought dreams that mirrored the night in the woods. He dreamed of confined spaces and unseen movement, of something pacing just beyond reach. He woke each time with his heart racing, the sensation of being watched lingering long after his eyes opened. Weeks passed, then months. The memory dulled slightly, edges softening with time. He began to believe that distance and routine had finally loosened whatever hold the forest had on him. The fear receded into the background, no longer constant, but it never vanished entirely. The first sign that it had followed him came quietly. One night, as he lay in bed, he became aware of a sound outside his window. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the normal noises of the neighborhood. A subtle compression of gravel. A shift of weight. The sound stopped, then resumed, careful and deliberate. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. Muscles tightened. Breath stilled. The memory surged back with terrifying clarity. The sound outside was too measured, too controlled to be dismissed as coincidence. It moved along the edge of his awareness, never quite loud enough to demand attention, but impossible to ignore. He remained still, listening. The sound traced a slow path along the side of the house, stopping intermittently, lingering in places where walls met windows. The pattern felt familiar. The realization settled over him like cold water. The pacing was the same. The sound did not approach the window directly. It maintained a precise distance, just as it had outside the tent. The parallel was undeniable. Whatever had learned the shape of his shelter in the forest now seemed to be learning the shape of his home. Panic threatened to overwhelm him. He fought it down, focusing on remaining quiet. He did not turn on lights. He did not move toward the window. Something deep in him understood that acknowledgement was still dangerous. The pacing continued for a long time, tracing the perimeter of the house with patient consistency. The neighborhood remained quiet. No dogs barked. No cars passed. The world felt suspended, as though the presence outside had claimed the space around him. Eventually the sound stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy but less charged. He waited for hours, muscles aching, before exhaustion forced him into shallow, uneasy sleep. In the morning, there were no signs of disturbance. No footprints. No marks. The ground beneath the window was undisturbed, as though nothing had been there at all. The absence of evidence did nothing to ease his fear. Similar incidents followed, spaced irregularly enough to prevent him from anticipating them. A soft sound near the back door late at night. A shift of weight near the fence. Always the same pattern. Never direct contact. Never escalation. Just presence. He considered practical explanations. He installed additional lighting. He checked security cameras obsessively, but they recorded nothing unusual. The footage showed empty spaces where he knew something had been. The lack of visual confirmation deepened his unease. Whatever this was did not operate within the limits of cameras or light. His world began to shrink. He avoided going out at night. He rearranged his life to minimize time spent alone after dark. The fear followed him regardless, a constant companion that shaped his decisions and thoughts. The realization came slowly, like a truth his mind resisted. The presence was not tied to the forest. The forest had merely been the place where it first revealed itself. It had not followed him in the way one follows a trail. It had attached itself to him. That understanding changed everything. The fear shifted from situational to existential. There was no place he could go where it could not reach him. Distance, walls, and time offered no real protection. The thing that had paced his tent did not belong to the woods alone. It belonged to the spaces between awareness and shelter. The visits became less frequent but more precise. The presence appeared in moments of vulnerability, when he was exhausted or distracted. A sound just outside his awareness. A sensation of pressure at his back. Always subtle. Always unmistakable. Years passed. He learned to live with it in the way one learns to live with chronic pain. It never left, but it became part of the background of his existence. He stopped fighting it, stopped searching for explanations. Resistance felt pointless. The final encounter happened on an ordinary night, devoid of significance. He lay in bed, drifting toward sleep, when the familiar sensation returned. The pressure. The awareness. The certainty of proximity. This time the footsteps were inside. They moved slowly through the house, not hiding, not rushing. Each step was deliberate, placed with care. The sound traced the rooms he knew so well, mapping the space just as it had mapped the tent years before. The realization was crushing. There was no barrier left. He remained frozen, fear pinning him in place. The footsteps stopped outside his bedroom door. The presence lingered there, patient as ever. He understood then that this was not a hunt. It was not a threat. It was a reminder. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated, fading back into silence. They did not return that night or the nights that followed. The visits ceased entirely. The absence did not bring peace. He lives now with the certainty that something knows him completely, that it can reach him whenever it chooses, that the thin boundaries humans rely on mean nothing to it. The forest was only the beginning, a place where he was first noticed. Some nights, when the world grows quiet, he listens carefully, knowing that if he hears footsteps again, it will not be because something is lost or curious. It will be because it has decided to remind him that he was never truly alone. Some encounters don't end when the night does. If this story unsettled you, remember that the scariest horrors are the ones that wait, watch, and follow. If you want more true dark stories like this, subscribe now. The woods are quiet, but they are never empty, and neither are the places you think are safe.